Hello, welcome back. Eddie Radosevich, George Stoia here as Oklahoma welcomes Iowa State to Norman on Saturday. George, what are you already smiling about? I don't like how we started this already.
I love your hello and welcome. You're just yelling into the mic. I appreciate it every time.
I am yelling a little bit. Well, I have great hair. I'd take the hat off, but
do you shampoo every day?
I don't, and I disclosed that this morning on the radio program. I do not shampoo anymore every day. I didn't know that in 37 years of life, I didn't know that was a thing. I've been shampooing every day. I'm moving on from the shampoo, though, maybe one or twice a week.
Yeah, I shampoo every day. Maybe I need to stop doing that. But I also use the daily Head and Shoulders shampoo.
Good. People have fast forwarded through that because they're here for the Iowa State preview. We'll be joined by Travis Hines here shortly. Let's talk about Iowa State. 3 wins against Oklahoma since 1990. Came in 1990, 2017, and then 2020 up in Ames, which was a weird game. One of the very few games I didn't go to because of COVID, and I know that you use the quotations when we talk about that. Let's talk about Iowa State, though. Matt Campbell, it's a name that I think a lot of people in the Big 12 country are familiar with, just with what he's been able to do with the Cyclone program. A little bit of a down year, coming in off of a win over Oklahoma State last week, 34-27. There was a lot of that gambling stuff within the Iowa State program that, they ended up losing 5 players because of it.
Yeah.
What do you think about the Cyclones coming to Norman, led by, John Heacock? How do I say it?
Heacock.
We did
like
this.
Peacock,
we
but
went
Heacock.
over this.
Yeah.
We went over this. I'm going to get Adebaro Ray before I get that.
Really good.
I want to clip that, and we're going to save it. But defensively, another really tough Cyclone football team.
That's what they're built on. And under Matt Campbell, that's what they've mostly always been built on. They've had good offensive players in the past. When you think of, Hutchinson, and you think of Brock Purdy, Charlie Kolar, all those guys, but they've been built on defense. That's where their bread and butter is. And you look at John Heacock. See, you caught me.
See?
You're the one. That's your fault. But with that 3-3-5 type defense that they run, and it's made it really difficult in Oklahoma. Really, you look back at that 2017 game that Oklahoma lost with Baker Mayfield, ends up being one of the best Oklahoma teams in recent memory. They lose at home to Iowa State. They were unable to move the ball very well in that game, and you look at what they've done against Oklahoma in the past in that defense. It's been kind of a struggle for them. So that's what you look at this Iowa State team. Is it the most talented group Oklahoma's going to face? Of course not. I mean, this is a team that might struggle to get to 6 wins, but defensively, they're going to be really sound. They have some young talent on that side of the ball, and they're just going to play really sound fundamental football because of John Heacock and kind of the discipline that Iowa State typically plays with.
They don't have a Mike Rose. They don't have a Will McDonald like we've seen in years past. It looks like the strength of Iowa State defensively is on the back end, in the secondary, which is going to be interesting for Dillon Gabriel and the Oklahoma offense. It's been well documented as far as Oklahoma's struggle in the run game, and I think that that's something that you look at this week, heading into what is next week with what's waiting in Dallas at the Cotton Bowl, that Oklahoma's going to want to be able to get something going on the ground against a relatively young group up front in that front 7.
Yeah, and that's where if there's one weakness in this defense, it might be up front. And you look at that back end, like you said, at safety and corner, they've got 3 or 4 guys that might end up playing in the NFL in that secondary. So it makes you wonder, does OU try to run the ball more? They're really young up front. They obviously don't have Will McDonald anymore, who was a thorn in Oklahoma's side for several years. Now he's playing in the NFL. And doing a great job there. So I think that's what you're going to look at. Can this offense kind of get back that running game? You and I talked a lot about it on the Tuesday show and kind of the running back rotation. What does that look like? But I think that is something that you're going to want to see from this Oklahoma team, especially if, they're playing 3 down linemen. It's sometimes hard to run against that because of the different run fits, but this is an Iowa State team that I think that might be the spot that you want to go after. And Dillon Gabriel's going to have his chances, and they're going to take some shots down the field. But I think that Oklahoma's going to want to try and run the football in this game.
You can't talk about Iowa State without talking about John Heacock and what he does. I mean, the 3-3-5 defense, it kind of it gave Lincoln Riley a lot of problems, and it's given Oklahoma just in general a lot of problems. And here is Brent Venables on Tuesday answering George's question about Iowa State's defense.
What was, affirmation that they do a great job at developing and teaching and scheming. Their players play with great effort and toughness and belief. they're very thorough as a staff, and there's a lot of cohesion there inside that building, and they've developed a great culture. Those are the things that have stood out to me, and they built something from a systematic standpoint, philosophy standpoint, scheme standpoint that has had longevity, in the conference.
They run that 3-3-5 type defense, and we've seen you guys run that occasionally here and there. Have you seen that defense maybe change the way the game's being played and way offenses and maybe catching up defensively in terms of that?
I think there's ebbs and flows. They get into four-man fronts a decent amount too, and so out of the same personnel. So that's their package, but they have a lot of scheme versatility to what they can do. I don't know if teams catch up or not. I don't. I think in the structurally, there's some things that are. People like to say, well, they just got 3 guys up there. Well, let's go, pound them. And that's true if you got the guys that can do that and the schemes that allow you to do that, potentially, But I've seen the schemes work pretty good at a high level against really good people, too. So I've seen the scheme get obliterated like every other scheme, over the years. So the scheme's no good if the players aren't executing it and playing with aggression and physicality and fundamentals, and that's what they do. They do a really good job of doing all those things.
That was Brent Venables talking to, or actually answering your question. I did a very poor job, maybe the first time I've ever done a very poor job of setting up a video. But that was John Heacock is a person that Brent Venables went and visited actually when he was still with Clemson, correct?
Yeah, no, I think it was, I want to say the 2018 season maybe. Him and the defensive staff at Clemson went down and visited Ames and spoke with John Heacock about the 3-3-5 defense. It had kind of taken over college football. I mean, you look at, again, that 2017 game was really when you saw it against Oklahoma, and has given a lot of teams trouble. So Brent went down there, studied it, talked to John Heacock, got to know him, and that's really where kind of that cheater position was almost kind of born out of. You saw Isaiah Simmons really exceed with it at Clemson. That was from that meeting at Iowa State, really, that it goes back to. So, and you'll see Oklahoma will run out there in that same sort of 3-3-5 type defense, their own version of it, and you're seeing it across college football. And it goes back to, the early 2000s is when it was really first implemented it. But, Iowa State's been running it now in the Big 12 the last, 6 or 7 years, and it's been super effective. So it's interesting to hear that. I always love hearing Brent just talk about defenses schematically. I mean, he's obviously one of the more knowledgeable guys in football right now in terms of defensive schemes. So kind of just an interesting backstory with him and John Heacock and their time, spent, a few years ago. I didn't think they probably didn't know that they were going to end up meeting like this.
Let it be known, George has said the O word, and I have not.
I've said it multiple times.
Yeah,
I've given up. I don't care anymore.
It's interesting. Well, you should care. This is your job. As for the players, Oklahoma players, we talked to them on Monday and Tuesday after practice. Another big number of guys that we were able to speak with, George. And, I think that it's part continuation of what they've already done on the schedule and playing really good defense, finding something offensively. It hasn't been just awful by any means. Mm-hmm. It's been inconsistent. But at the same time, I think that, this is a week that I find to be very fascinating in what's to come. With everybody knowing what is ahead down in Dallas, everybody kind of, I think the fan base has their eyes set on OU Texas and what could be one of those matchups that the national media talk about maybe more so than usual when it comes to the afternoon down at the State Fair of Texas. But mentally, I think that we've talked to some players about not looking forward and staying on the same plane of what they've been preaching from day one here with Team 129, and that is, a nameless, faceless opponent. As cliche as it might sound, I find it to be this week the most important.
Yeah, look, you look at this week and obviously, and the O word, you got me thinking about it already. But,
yeah, now you're going to think about, well, you need to take your job seriously.
But, yeah, you look at this group, and that's kind of the next step for them is we talked about it last week, is that Texas game. And everybody's already looking forward to it. But, if Oklahoma's taken the strides that we think they have, then they take care of business this week. This is an Iowa State team, like I said. They're going to be fundamentally sound. They're going to come in prepared, and they're going to make it tough on Oklahoma. But this is still a team that Oklahoma should go out and beat by 20 or 20 more points, right? I mean, that's what you're looking at this week. It's a night game in Norman. They should be fired up. The fans, I'm sure, are going to be really excited. It's sold out, for the whatever 149th time or whatever it is. So, but yeah, Eddie, you're right. In the back of everyone's head, outside of the program, they're already looking to Texas. The question is, are the players ready for this weekend? And I think talking to them this week, I got the sense that they're not even thinking about Texas just yet.
Yeah, and it comes down to leadership and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
But here is a number of Oklahoma players talking about the upcoming matchup against Iowa State.
I think any team playing the Big 12 is going to give you a new challenge. Iowa State brings their challenges as well. We're excited for this game and being able to play under the lights on Saturday.
Oh, man, I just want to play back in the Palace again. It's so fun being at night, especially just seeing the fans again. That's really all I miss, honestly. And we respect Iowa State a lot because we understand that the ratio annually is 101 to 100, so we just try to capitalize on them. They're a great team coming in. They're fierce. And they never quit. They never back down. So we were ready for that challenge.
Next step is just keep stacking days, keep stacking practices, trying to go 1-0 every day, get better at something every day because, you can't become complacent. You're not going to be perfect in any way, shape, or form playing football. I mean, every day you're going to try to get better at something, whether it's run, your technique, or something. You always have a focus every day on something to get better at.
Anytime you play good on defense, I think it's going to give you momentum into the next week. We took it, we learned from it. Still had some mistakes that we got to get better from, but I think overall it gave us a confidence booster to keep playing hard. Now we're 4-0.
Just with their structure and what they and their scheme and what they present, just something that you gotta, kind of really gotta dissect and find holes and, be very patient until they give you those opportunities to take advantage of.
Oh, I mean, every team we played has brought us to be our best. We kind of want to just play ourselves every week, not really play like we play a nameless, faceless. That's what Coach V says, nameless, faceless opponent. And I think if we play up to our standard every week, it doesn't really matter who we play.
Absolutely, I think every week we're playing. It's basically against ourselves. We got to clean up our stuff. When as the season gets longer, you got to tighten up all the aspects. And so you can play better football.
What are some of the challenges that Iowa State presents offensively?
Yeah, I mean, they're going to do a lot of, formation of the boundary, lots of shifts, lots of motion. So they really got to see how we adjust, to each of their different formations, a lot of exotics, end overs, X-offs, stuff like that. So we got to be ready to, come prepared with a good game plan, how to adjust all their formations.
We just got to everybody has to do their job and not worry about everybody else. And again, we have a lot of people rotating, receiver room, running back room. We all have just to capitalize on our own opportunities and stop worrying about who's getting what and who's doing what. Just keep doing our own job and keep our head down. And everybody has to be a team leader at the end of the day. And we just have to keep capitalizing.
I think it's really good as a unit. We got some really good guys on our defensive line, interior and on the outside too. And I mean, I think everybody just has that, confidence in pass rushing and run defense. And I mean, we just keep stacking these days, building off of each other. When somebody's doing bad, picking that person up and then continuing on to the next week, the next opponent.
I think it's pretty good. They got a young quarterback coming in. He's pretty well rounded. Good guy. They have a 13, nice slot guy. I think it'll be a good challenge for us and it'll be a good challenge for them as well.
Oklahoma has won 17 of 18 night games in Norman, starting 6 o'clock or later. Pretty good stat.
Yeah, the great stat. Where did you get that?
You showed me.
Yeah.
Just literally seconds ago.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Per George Stoia, per OU Football Twitter account.
All the credit goes to my calc there.
Yeah.
For a little bit more on Iowa State and what they have to offer this weekend, we were joined by Travis Hines from the Des Moines Register, and here is our interview with Travis. For this week's opponent preview, we welcome in Travis Hines from the Des Moines Register. Travis, thanks for joining us. I'm sure it's been a interesting beat for the Cyclone football program with all the gambling stuff here over the last couple months.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, thanks for having me. And yeah, it's never a dull moment up here, good, bad, or I guess gambling pros. There's always something going on.
No doubt about it. Just overall with Matt Campbell's program, I think that he's always been kind of one of those names, and I'm sure that you're well aware of his name being connected to just about every other job here over the last 4 or 5 years. What's that thing look like right now with Iowa State as they come to Norman 2-2 this weekend? It feels like, I think from the outside looking at it, feels like maybe it's dropped off a little bit, but I know that they're rebuilding a little bit, especially on the defensive side of the ball where they might be young in some places.
Yeah, there's definitely a reset for the program that really dates back to last year. When they had the success of 2020 winning the Fiesta Bowl, everybody came back in 2021, essentially using that COVID year for most guys. And it's been a reset and a flip of the roster the last 2 years, 4-8 last year. And then you add in the gambling probe that cost him 5 starters this offseason on top of, just the uncertainty of dealing with this all summer long. And now you're seeing youth. They've got freshmen up and down the roster and on the depth chart. And so to say where exactly the program is going forward is tough to say because it's going to depend on the development of those young guys. But certainly right now, it's a dip. And whether the dip continues or we see an uptrend, that time will tell. But certainly right now, this is not the team that it was 3 years ago, 4 years ago.
Travis, just the start to this year, obviously kind of disappointing in terms of, losing to Iowa, which seems to happen annually to Iowa State, and then turn around and lose to Ohio, but bounce back with a nice win over Oklahoma State. Just what's the feeling head into Norman this week after beating Oklahoma State at home last week?
I think there's a little dose of cautious optimism because really you go back to last year's 4-8 season, the main complaint from fans and the frustration, which was well earned, was that the offense was bad. And it was really, really bad. And then you see the 2 games they lose this year against Iowa, which has a really good defense, and against Ohio, which has a good defense, but it's a MAC defense. The offense was terrible in both those games. They only scored 7 on the road against Ohio. I think you could really look at that as a low point in Matt Campbell's tenure at Iowa State. Then you come out and you score 34 points against Oklahoma State last week. That has people, kind of finding their balance a little bit after being on tilt a little bit after that Ohio game. But I do think there's a recognition from Iowa State fans that Oklahoma State's not very good overall, and they're certainly not great defensively. And still, Iowa State was only able to average 2.2 yards per carry. So I think there's some hope that they saw a little bit of a breakthrough last week, but also acknowledgement that this thing is probably going to be a work in progress throughout the season.
What can you tell us about the run game? What has been the biggest problem there, just in terms of being able to get some help through the ground? And, on the other side of that, tell us a little bit about Rocco Becht stepping in as a freshman to kind of lead this Cyclone offense.
Yeah, well, I don't think the running game's issues, the number one problem is not the loss of Jirel Brock to the gambling probe, but you have to note that they lost their starting running back to the gambling probe. So that's the starting block. But the real issue has been is the offensive line has really, really struggled in the run game. They've been pretty good in pass protection, but in the running game, they have been absolutely blown up. Again, Ohio lived in the backfield. That MAC defensive line absolutely out-physicaled them and won the battle in the trenches for the whole 60 minutes of that game, to the point where Matt Campbell, who is really reticent to criticize his own team and certainly criticize a specific player or position group, called the offensive line play embarrassing against Ohio. So that's really where it starts. And then you've got young guys in the backfield. Cartavius Norton's a sophomore but was injured all last year. Abu Sama is a true freshman. Carson Hansen's a true freshman. They've had Eli Sanders, who's gotten a little bit of playing time here and there throughout his career, missed a couple of games. So it's really been a mess all across the board, but it starts with that offensive line not being able to block anybody. And, they 2.2 yards a carry last week, 1.7 the week before. And against the best defense they played, Iowa, they had their best output, 2.8 yards per carry. So there's a real issue there. But on the flip side, against Oklahoma State, I think we saw an acknowledgement that running game, while you have to strive for improvement the rest of the year, there's probably a ceiling on it, at least in the short and intermediate term, where you're going to have to throw the football. And they let Rocco Becht throw it 38 times, 345 yards, 3 touchdowns, and he was really good. And I think there's an acknowledgement that for this offense to move the ball, probably going to have to be through the air. Now, is it going to be a full air raid? No, I don't think so, but I do think that they know that the running game is bad, and to win, they're going to have to throw the football. And Rocco Becht has been a pleasant surprise in that he's Brock Purdy-esque in that super efficient, can kind of dodge the pass protection. He's not as dynamic as Purdy was, but when he's at his best, it's, completing a high percentage of his passes, not really stretching the field, but hitting those short to intermediate routes with a high consistency, and letting the receivers and the tight ends, do a little bit of extra work.
I think it was Brent Venables this week that also compared Rocco Beck to Brock Purdy. So interesting there, and Oklahoma fans are obviously very familiar with Brock, playing him all those years. Travis, I wanted to ask you about the other side of the ball. Iowa State has been built on defense for years, one of the best defensive groups, if not the best defensive group in the Big 12 for the last several years. Who stands out on that side of the ball? I know they've got a talented secondary. I think it's Jeremiah Cooper that has 3 interceptions already this year. I mean, who are some of those playmakers, and is that Iowa State defense as good as it usually is?
Yeah, the Iowa State defense has been really good so far this year, despite being probably the youngest that it's been. Maybe going back to that first year where Matt Campbell and defensive coordinator John Haycock took over in 2016. And it's been on the strength of the secondary. TJ Tampa is an NFL cornerback. Bo Freeler is a 3-year starter. Jeremiah Cooper has been great. Miles Purchase is a really solid second cornerback, and they've got some depth there. There are still some question marks up front and at linebacker, specifically linebacker, where they're young and inexperienced. The defensive line has been pretty good, where it hasn't been a standout like a Will McDonald the last couple of years where he's just setting sack record after sack record, but they've been able to hold their own as a group. And really the question going into Saturday is going to be the health of that secondary. They did not have starting safety Malik Verdon. They did not have a starting corner in Darian Porter against Oklahoma State. And Mike Gundy was able to make them pay for that. They gave up more big plays and more yardage than they have in a long time. I think they broke a 18-game streak of giving up fewer than 400 yards in a game. Oklahoma State had a couple of really, 50-plus yard plays that Iowa State just does not give up, and I think you can attribute that a lot to the health, and it's unclear if those two guys are going to be available Saturday. If they're there, this is a top-tier Iowa State defense. If they're not, they're still pretty good, but maybe not quite at that elite level that we've seen from them the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, you go back to the Oklahoma State game last weekend, and that was going to be my question was, this isn't a defense that gives up a bunch of big plays. Is that a mixture of just having backups in, or because of injury, having to play some guys that usually don't get out there? And, I would imagine that Jeff Lebby's going to try to do some of the same things that Oklahoma State did in terms of Jaden Nixon and moving him out of the backfield, getting one-on-one matchups with that inexperienced linebacker core.
I think the injuries undoubtedly played a huge part. I don't think they probably give up all those big plays and all that yardage if they're fully healthy, but that's the name of the game. The backups have got to step up, but you also have to give, I think, Oklahoma State and Mike Gundy a lot of credit. On one of their big touchdowns, they've got their running back matched up on Iowa State's backup middle linebacker who just physically could not keep up with them, and he just raced down the sideline for a touchdown. That's just a scheme win for Oklahoma State that I'm sure Oklahoma was looking at film all week, and certainly Iowa State as well. But I do think while this Iowa State defense can be really good at full speed and full health, they're still inexperienced, they're still youth, that the mistakes are going to be more frequent than we've seen when Iowa State's been at its best.
Travis, obviously a tall task this weekend for Iowa State coming into Norman, but the Cyclones have fared well in Norman the last few times. I mean, you think back to the 2017 win in Norman for Iowa State. 2019 was a close game, same with 2021. I think Brent said it this week, 101 to 100 over the course of those 3 games. So really close games. I know it's like I think it's a 20-point spread of somewhere around there right now. What does Iowa State need to do to keep this thing close going into the fourth quarter?
The obvious answer is run the football, but I don't think if you've watched them through 4 games this year, you can have any faith in them to run the ball, whether it's that offensive line or inexperience at running back. So the question to me is going to be, number one, can that defense slow down Dylan Gabriel in Oklahoma? I think they got an okay chance. I think they've had success in the past with their scheme against Oklahoma, but that's not going to be an easy thing. But then number 2 is, can Iowa State move the ball with the pass while not getting into those 30-second possession 3-and-outs with 3 incompletions or 2 incompletions and a 1-yard run? They have to be able to have some semblance of ball control, because we have not really seen, with a few exceptions, this being a quick strike offense. They're going to have to methodically move the ball, and that means utilizing the tight ends, probably using the running backs in the passing games for essentially, the tunnel screens, that are long handoffs, essentially. They've got to be able to slow the game down, because this is not a team that if they go to try to strike for strike with Oklahoma, it's probably going to be 42-21. I mean, it's just going to be a really tough task for them. So the defense has got to be lights out, and then the offense has to strike a balance between the passing game and ball control.
I think the two things that Oklahoma fans know about Iowa State, they're always going to be very good defensively as long as John Heacoke is over there. And then secondly, just with a local flair to it, Charlie Kohler in the tight end position. Is that group just young this year, or are they suffering through a little bit of injuries as well?
Another spot where they lost their starter in Deshaun Hanika to the gambling probe, and they got a guy, Easton Dean, that they had a ton of hope for when he came in, has battled injuries and hasn't really emerged as that heir to Charlie Kohler, but they do think that they have Charlie Kohler's successor now in terms of stardom on the roster. A true freshman, Ben Bramer from Nebraska. They kind of stole him out from the Huskers' nose there late in the recruiting cycle, and he is physically ahead of where Charlie was as a true freshman. And you talk to people around the program, they think he's maybe a year or two ahead of Charlie in terms of skill as a true freshman, which again is saying a lot because Charlie Kohler is the best tight end in Iowa State history, obviously playing on Sundays now. But Ben Bramer has been a weapon for Iowa State. And I do think he's going to be a guy that they're going to look to incorporate more and more because he has the size, he's got speed, he's got skill to where he can really be a difference maker from that position.
Travis, last one from me, and you talked about it a little bit earlier, but just what is the expectation for Iowa State this year? I mean, you mentioned it coming off the 4-8 season, obviously a disappointing year. I mean, Matt Campbell, we hear his name every single year up for some of these big coaching jobs. I mean, what is the expectation? Is Campbell even on the hot seat? I mean, is he somebody you could see finally making that leap to a different job? And just what is the outlook for this year?
I think the hope is and was a bowl game. When you lose that game to Ohio, I think that kind of recalibrates things where people still have it in the back of their mind, but the more immediate expectation is the offense figuring it out and not being abysmal, like get to below average from abysmal. I think that's what people are really hoping for. And in terms of Campbell, I don't, unless they have a bowl game type season or they're able to figure this out and have 7-8 wins this year, which seems like a Herculean task, I don't know what jobs would be open to him and available to him, especially the caliber that we think he's either turned down or been involved in. You go back just, it would have been after the 2020 season or the 2021 season, linked to USC, linked to Notre Dame. I think he was probably runner-up number 3 in both of those, but he's not going to get mentioned in any kind of jobs of that caliber. Maybe even a Michigan State, I don't think would probably give him. That'd be a tough sell there when you go you underachieve in 2021, the best roster in school history. You go 7-6, and we're really never in the thing to win the Big 12. You go 4-8 last year. This year it's going to be a struggle to get to 500 or 6 wins. And so I think that's going to be would be a tough sell for an AD to any of the upper tier programs. And if you're not there, I don't know that a lateral move makes sense because despite the downturn or the dip the program's seen here the last couple of years, Campbell has years of runway in terms of the hot seat. I mean, they could go 2-10 or 3-9 or whatever this year. And you're even talking about you'd have to have a pretty bad season again next year to where Campbell's on the hot seat. It's just, again, you got to contextualize where Iowa State has been. I think when he took over, maybe been to 7 or 8 bowl games in their history, and he took them to 5 straight. Yeah. Never never appeared in a January 1 bowl game. They win the Fiesta Bowl. Never been in a conference championship game. They're right down there to the final possession with Oklahoma in 2020. So they have done a ton, and they're recruiting. Again, if you want to look at rankings, they got to develop those players. But in terms of rankings, their recruiting is as good as it's ever been. So there's tons of space, time, and resources for Campbell to get this thing back up on the upswing. So I think it's far more likely that he's at Iowa State for the foreseeable future than A, taking another job, or way more unlikely B, finding himself on the hot seat or fired.
Now that the dust is settled with everything with the Big 12 and Oklahoma and Texas's departure, where does Iowa State feel like they kind of fell in everything that happened with the rest of the conference and the future of what they will be in the Big 12 once everybody leaves?
I think they feel pretty good because it seems like the league has stabilized. The Pac-12 is no longer a threat. Sure. The Big 12 is solidly positioned at number 3, so there's long been fears. You go back to 2010 or 2011 when it was the last time we had this big thing of realignment. Iowa State, there was a time there where they felt like they were staring into the Mountain West abyss. Like if the Big 12 fell apart, they're not going to be able to find a home. That I don't think is no longer an immediate fear with where the Big 12 is at right now. And then you look around the rest of the Big 12, is there a juggernaut? The Pac-12 schools coming in are obviously going to have, be in a good position, but the other 4 schools that they're bringing in from the Power 5, that's not going, in terms of a resource allocation, that's not going to scare anybody in Ames. So I think Iowa State feels really good about where they're positioned, because they were never going to be able to catch Oklahoma or Texas in terms of resources and support and just where they fit in the college football pecking order. So I think they're looking at this as a potential for them to move up in the world in the Big 12, because Iowa State does spend on football. They just finished a huge new football facility. So they feel good about where they're at in the new Big 12. I think they felt great before the Pac-12 schools came in, and now you're going to have to overcome those 4 as well.
For sure. Travis, safe travels down to Norman this weekend, and we will see you on Saturday when Oklahoma takes on Iowa State, 6 o'clock in Norman. We appreciate it, man.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Travis.
Special thank you to Travis for joining us. It is interesting with Iowa State just in terms of what this is. I think there's a lot of people that maybe have not necessarily changed their mind about Iowa State because of the 34-27 victory a week ago, but it was a game that Rocco Beck played really well. I think they had 7 or 8 gains through the air of over 20 yards. So at the end of the day, it's another game, another opportunity for Oklahoma, especially on that defensive side of the ball, to get after Rocco Becht, a freshman quarterback. You hope that you can kind of force him into some things that maybe Oklahoma State didn't a week ago, where they're struggling on the back end in the secondary.
I think, too, you look at this Iowa State team, and Travis talked about it, that offensive line not being very, very great, obviously, in the run game. I wonder if they can get after Rocco Becht a little bit in the backfield too. Force some pressure, force some bad throws. I mean, I talked about it last week with Cincinnati and Emory Jones. He's a decent quarterback, but if you put pressure on him, he's going to make mistakes, and we saw that, right? I mean, Oklahoma had 2 interceptions. He made some bad throws. I think you can have that same sort of pressure on him where he's going to give you the football at some point, and so that's where you feel really good. I think Oklahoma should be able to stop them, with consistent pressure and things like that. I mean, if Iowa State can't run the ball, I mean, that's where Oklahoma's defense has maybe been its best, is in the run game. So you feel really good about that. It's just, what can this offense do? And this is kind of that first, big test for that Oklahoma offense. It was a little bit last week against Cincinnati, and Cincinnati did some nice things, but Oklahoma missed. Oklahoma missed on some things, and that's where this week can Oklahoma take advantage of that Iowa State defense, if there's any holes in there down the field, or can they actually run the football this week? We'll see. But that's kind of that to me is where I'm really interested to see is that Oklahoma offense versus the Iowa State defense.
We talked about it on the Soonerscoop.com YouTube channel on Tuesday during the Tuesday practice report. We talked about it on radio. We've talked about it on the Unofficial 40. Last week, it seemed like, George, it was a situation that you had the Corleone kid as well as Briggs, the defensive tackle for Cincinnati. You had some guys, some actual dudes up front. This week, it's a little bit of another step in terms of what competition is, but it's about the front, and it's about the scheme of what Iowa State's going to throw at you. And then you kind of got to combine everything next week when you get to Texas.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And look, they don't have a Corleone necessarily up front, but what they do schematically makes it really hard to run the football sometimes. And so you wonder, can Oklahoma kind of figure that out this week? And again, at that secondary, you heard some of those names. Those guys are going to play in the NFL. And so what does that look like? You look at Oklahoma's receiving core. You feel really good about them, right? Can they find those explosive plays with Andrell Anthony, Nick Anderson, those type of guys? What's the offensive line look like this week? I mean, is Troy Everett going to start? Savion Byrd is back, according to Brent Venables, from that concussion. So is he going to get the start at left guard? Is it going to be Troy Everett? It's going to be a rotation. We'll see. This is about the time of the season, though, that you want to see everything start to come together. And so that's one of these games, Eddie. We've said it all week. You want to have some momentum going to next week. And again, I feel really good about the defense. If you want to jump over to that side, and Dasan McCullough.
Well, let's stay right there real quick as in terms of injuries and things that Oklahoma will be getting back. As George said, Savion Byrd is expected to be back in the starting. Well, I don't know about starting rotation, but he is back available after missing last week up in Cincinnati. Didn't even travel because of the concussion sustained in the Tulsa game. And then you have Reggie Pearson, who's returned back to practice. He missed last week with a neck injury. You have R. Mason Thomas, who has been, I think, quietly kind of swept under the radar just in terms of not being able to get out onto the field. I believe he's been nursing an ankle injury. Yep. He should be back. He practiced, as well as Jaren Kanak, who left the game on Saturday with what I believe is just being called a contusion. I know that he talked about it on the Prairie on the podcast, or podcast on the Prairie, excuse me.
Yeah, I don't know how available he'll be. I mean, that's such an interesting injury. Like he was out there. We saw him at practice this week, and Brent Venables said that he practiced. So I anticipate he'll play, but I wonder if he's some sort of limited snap count. You just don't know the severity of an injury like that. But
and it helps at the linebacker position in terms of preparing for what's to come with Texas and then Central Florida and Kansas, which is shaping up to be quite an interesting matchup at the end of the month of October. You just need to get him healthy. You need to get them healthy. I think they feel pretty confident about what Kip Lewis could bring, about what Akobe McKenzie could bring at the linebacker position, and that goes into the competitive depth and things like that. One of the guys that they did get back last week, Dasan McCullough, looked pretty good in terms of just getting back onto the field and getting back up to game speed.
The biggest thing for him is he looked comfortable. He looked like he knew where he was supposed to be. He got beat one time on the wheel route. That's going to happen. He bit on the fake and got burnt on it. But he talked about that after the game and understanding his assignment and those sorts of things. But he just looks like a different body out there, Eddie. I mean, you see him, and he's so lengthy coming around the edge or, out in coverage, whatever it may be. It's a big boost to have him there because, again, Justin Harrington was playing really good football before he got hurt, and then all of a sudden you're throwing out, a Peyton Bowen out there who was playing well and can do some different things. But I thought it was great to see Dasan out there. He's a guy that he's still so young. I think we forget because he's a transfer.
Oh, 100%.
He's only like 19, 20 years old,
right.
And is still very much learning the position. So he's going to have mistakes, but the guy is so athletic that he makes up for it, and he just seems to be a playmaker. It seems to, wherever the ball goes, he figures out how to be there and make a play. So I'm excited to see him again this week. Again, he's going to just get better as he gets more reps, and he's a guy that, again, can be just a huge difference maker for this defense if he continues to come along.
Real quick, before we get to the video, about a week away from starting to wonder if Justin Harrington can at least give it a go if he's not going to have that season-ending surgery. Would you agree with that?
I think so, and again, it comes down to I don't know what the decision is there in terms of does he want to end the season and maybe try and come back or next year and get a hardship. I would think before Texas he'll have to make a call, but we've seen him out at practice not practicing, but with the brace on his knee and kind of just out there with the team.
I mean, I'm already like the cheetah position and how they're going to match up with Jatavian Sanders next week. That's already something that I think is on a lot of people's minds.
Yeah.
And we can do that because we can speculate and bitch and moan and do whatever we want. We're the media. We can do whatever we want. Here is Brent Venables as well as Rondell Bothroyd, Danny Stutzman, and Key Lawrence talking about the reemergence or the return of Dasan McCullough.
Yeah, I mean, he's missed a couple weeks, so he's a guy that's coming out of spring that really had a really good spring and a good finish and had an excellent summer. First part of camp was great. Saw that he hadn't played in a little while, and so he'll be the first one to tell you he's kind of getting back into the rhythm of what that looks like and what that process is. But he did a nice job, and I expect him to make improvement each and every week that he plays.
Yeah, well, we kind of play on opposite sides, so I don't really see him too much, but that's kind of a good thing. I know that other side of the field's kind of locked down with him over there. It's a big body, he can really cover a lot of grass. He did a tremendous job doing that, very physical. He's really a sure tackler and someone, kind of like having another me on the other side of the field.
Good to have Dasan back, man, because that guy's a beast. And just having somebody like him with the energy and the motor, it definitely pushes me because he's somebody that lifts me up all the time in the middle of a play. When I may be frustrated, he come to me and be like, "You all right?" and vice versa. So it's good to have him back.
Oh, he's great. He's vocal, knows what he's doing, and then just watching him fly around. Same thing with Danny, same thing with Jaren. Just all the corners, all the safeties. It's cool to turn around and watch them making plays because the ball gets out quick sometimes. But it's just cool to see everyone making plays and having fun.
Getting to that time of the year where we're going to need taking a light out to practice. The temperature, though, you wouldn't know it. It's 1,000 degrees in Norman on Thursday, and I think it should be relatively pretty nice on Saturday night.
It's going to be so
kickoff.
hot next week, too. in Dallas.
It is every year.
Every year.
It is every year. And don't get teased. I know that there was a couple people that have already thrown me projected forecasts for everything down at the Cotton Bowl.
Don't buy it.
Right now, it's like low 80s. It'll magically just
chance.
reappear at 92, 95 by the time we make that way down 35 next week. As for the rest of Oklahoma defensively, I think it's been a storyline. I know that you're writing about it for Friday morning on Soonerscoop.com. Key Lawrence, I almost fell out of my seat yesterday when you were explaining to me that this is just the first time that he has been back with a head coach in Brent Venables right now. This is the first time that he's had a head coach for 2 consecutive years, and that's dating all the way back to high school ball.
It's crazy. I mean, he's a guy that, look, we all know he has the athletic ability. It's about, can it click mentally? Can he mature and grow off the field? And I think some of that has to do with, like I said, he's a guy that in high school, he had 4 different head coaches all 4 years. He was at Innsworth High School in Tennessee. He goes to Tennessee with Jeremy Pruitt. Obviously, that goes to hell in Tennessee. He transfers to Oklahoma, plays 1 year under Lincoln Riley and Alex Grinch. That whole staff leaves. And now he's, in his second year with Brent Venables. And you look at his career last year under Brent, he didn't play a ton. I mean, he was a guy that was in the rotation at safety a little bit, but, didn't really have a role, at least an important role on this team, it seemed at times. And so this year it seems like he's really grown into that. He stuck with it, Eddie. I mean, he's a kid that a lot of people thought maybe he jumps in the transfer portal.
Sure.
And he didn't. And, he stuck it out. He really has connected with Brent Venables. It sounds. I mean, Brent brought him up in the press conference, unprovoked the other day.
Played it on the Tuesday show on the practice report.
Exactly. I mean, it's cool to see a kid like that kind of grow into his own. And I know he talked about it a lot this week. But yeah, just an awesome story. A kid that, again, that's what makes or breaks a program, right? I mean, obviously you want to recruit high level players, and that's where your lifeblood is. But when you can have kids that stick around for 4 or 5 years and grow into really solid, good players like a Key Lawrence, Marcus Stripling was the other name that came up. That only helps your program, because you can't just build it on, obviously, true freshmen and kids from the portal. But if you can have a guy like Key stick around, I think that's really important.
Well, and especially in terms of buy-in, and especially in terms of development. And I think that we talked about this on the Unofficial 40 this week, just in terms of, I know that Brent loves talking about PJ. He loves talking about Peyton Bowen and what, those guys are going to be as 5-stars. But we're talking about the here and now. And while those guys are contributors, getting guys like Key Lawrence to buy into the program, be leaders, and especially weeks like this, when you're talking about not looking past an Iowa State to get to Texas, it's a big, I think, statement in a way for the rest of the program and the rest of the culture that Brent Venables is building here now. 1 year and 4 games into this,
and he's a captain. He gets voted a captain this week. I think that that tells you not only how good he's playing right now, but also just the respect that he's earned from his teammates. I mean, he's a guy that's been around the program. He knows what it looks like. He's been through the ups and downs of a good season and then a bad season, and so I think he's just earned that respect. And I think that Brent, again, that's what he wants to build. Is yes, he wants to go out and recruit the top players, but he also wants guys to stick around and buy into what they're selling. And I think his quote was, not everybody's going to be Sam Bradford or Adrian Peterson, where they come in and they're just great right away. A lot of these guys have to stick it out for 2 or 3 or 4 years before they reach their full potential.
Sam Bradford, Adrian Peterson, Eddie Radosevich, and this is Key Lawrence talking about his development.
Well, I didn't know that, but now that he did say that about me, I appreciate it, man. He's been telling me that I've been doing a good job practicing to hold myself better, and I've just been trying to be accountable, man. Just living in the moment, just trying to go step by step, day by day. Everybody's different. You just got to carry yourself and just sit back and observe first, and then you go out there and approach things the right way. Like, for example, I have like Isaiah Cole. He's more of a loud guy, but he's quiet as well on the football field, and sometimes he can be loud, so you just approach him different than you would Danny Stessman, who's always rowdy. You know what I'm saying? So it just be like, no offense to Danny, I know how Danny is, but like, well, yeah, so it's just a different approach, and just sit back and observe first and before you go out there and just make a critique.
Brent talked about January when you came back after the break. Things had changed for you. What happened during the break, and kind of did you explore like portal and things like that, or?
No, it was just my mindset, man. Like, I found myself last year just always getting down on myself just because questioning things that I can't control. Yeah. So I just try to control the controllables. I know it's cliche to sound, but cliche to say, but I definitely just try to live in the moment, like I keep saying, because it's just, people like, you just got to have an attitude of gratitude. And I had to learn at the hard way, and they were just getting down on myself, and I had to pick myself up and understand I can't get down like that no more.
How much fun have these last couple weeks?
It's been real fun, man. Like, just seeing all my guys buying in, and we just trying to like have fun on the football field because we got to be here anyway, so we may as well put the work in.
I would say just overall demeanor, it's just starting to click, with, I think, coming up, he's a senior right now, I'm pretty sure, and that, it's coming to an end. You have more days behind you than you have in front of you here at Oklahoma, of course, but he's been playing great ball, and I think he'll continue to do this.
So there it is. The table is set for Oklahoma and Iowa State coming up at 6 o'clock on Saturday evening. A really good stat from Brett McMurphy before we get out of here. OU's a 20-point favorite going into the weekend against Iowa State. Can you guess what they are straight up the week before OU Texas the last 6 years?
Oh, boy.
Straight up as well as against the spread.
Straight up.
I know I'm just throwing this at you now.
No, I'm trying to think. They lost who did they lose to right before playing Texas? I guess last year they lost.
Last year was TCU with the Dylan Gabriel injury.
They lost in 2017 right before. It was Iowa State.
Iowa State was one of them in 2017. They're 3-3.
Wow.
In the last 6 years, the week before the Texas game, they were a 5-point favorite last year, got beat down in Fort Worth 55-24. It was an ass whooping. 2021, they
were a favorite in that game? I guess we didn't know.
In TCU, because we
didn't know what TCU was then.
Well, you didn't know, and Gabriel was playing well at the time, right?
And they barely lost to K-State.
Sure.
That's right.
2021, they were a 12-point favorite against Kansas State. They won, but didn't cover.
I was about to say, I don't think
37-31.
What are they against the spread?
They're 1-5 against the spread.
I was about to say, I bet they're like really low.
In 2020, they were a 7.5-point favorite at Iowa State, lost 37-30 in a game that was kind of a weird game. It was a night game, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
Spencer Rattler threw a couple picks and even threw a pick on the final possession of the game when it seemed like Oklahoma was moving the football. 2019, they were a 32-point favorite against Kansas. They won 35-20. 2018, they were a 21.5-point favorite against Baylor. They did cover in that game 66-33. That was the one of the six, excuse me. And then 2017, they were a 31-point favorite against Iowa State, and all of a sudden you look up and they get beat 37-31.
And this goes back to
38-31.
I think I said this either on the Unofficial 40 or the earlier show this week, Eddie, but some of those Lincoln Riley teams, you would face these type of teams, these Iowa State teams that you should cover. You should beat Iowa State by 21 or more on Saturday if you're a good football team. And they didn't. They often struggled against these inferior opponents, and that's where again you want to see that next step. Now, part of me is also like just go win and get to Dallas, right?
Because at the beginning of this whole entire season, we said Oklahoma has to be 5-0 going into Dallas, right?
Correct. And they should be. And again, part of me is like just get a win and move on. But also, again, if you want to continue to take that step, because I thought they took a big step last week going to Cincinnati, handling business, playing defense the way they did.
I thought they took a step, and I know this sounds like really effed up.
SMU.
I thought they took a step in Tulsa.
Yeah.
Against it, like stepping on the throat of an inferior opponent was something that Oklahoma simply hadn't done in a while.
Yeah, and even the SMU game. I know that game was a 3-point game in the fourth quarter. 14-11.
But they finished, and that's something they've talked about since the middle of March when we were talking to them before the spring game, right?
Yeah, and so that's again goes to that point of
and especially a team that couldn't do that a year ago.
Yeah,
I mean, talk about all the 1-point or the 1-score losses. What?
you just keep cutting me off at my
well,
point.
I feel like Carrie right now.
I know you are like Carrie, but no, you're right. You're cutting me off and making really good points. But yes, you're finishing my sentences. That's what you're doing.
That's just chemistry, is what that is, folks.
But yes, Eddie, they need to go out. They need to cover against Iowa State. I know you. I mean, I don't know if you have money on them, but I know some people that do. So maybe they need to go cover. Maybe Iowa State. Yeah, hey, maybe some of their players have Iowa State plus 20.5.
You're a disgusting person for accusing them of doing that, but it is a good question. Gambling's illegal here in the state of Oklahoma. Can I wink? I don't know how to wink. That could be a character flaw.
Wrap it up.
That should be it. Score real quick.
I'm going to take Oklahoma 34-14.
Okay.
I think they're right around the 20 points, but I think Oklahoma's going to be able to score. I think they're going to have to kick some field goals.
Sure.
I think we're going to see some Zach Schmidt because again, that Iowa State defense is going to stop them a few times, but I think the defense again steps up and plays well.
They find any answers in the run game?
Probably not. I have no faith in the run game until they can show me that they can consistently do it. And look, they'll probably go out and run for 4 yards a carry, which is fine. But I just don't have a whole lot of faith that they're going to go out there and just run the ball all over an Iowa State team that I expect to finish, towards the top of the Big 12. I'll
go 41-17 and a continuation of what George just said. I think defensively this thing is starting to roll. I kind of feel like everybody else out there that goes, yeah, but... And I think everybody's just kind of waiting for the shoe to fall or the shoe to drop just in terms of what Oklahoma's been doing defensively. But you look at it and you see the way that Danny Stutzman's playing. You see the way that guys are starting to step up. Even a guy like a Rondell Bothroyd a week ago, I thought played really well, even though the box score didn't show it. And you look at, the box score last week even, and we talked about this on the Tuesday show. There's 30 guys listed in the defensive side of the box score with 26 of those guys, or 30 guys played, 26 guys listed in the box score, which tells you they're getting contribution from just about anybody that they're putting out on the field. So we will talk to you on Saturday, late night in Norman here at the Sooner Scoop offices, as well on Campus Corner with the 6 o'clock kickoff. So we will talk to you next time on the Soonerscoop.com YouTube channel, post-game instant reaction report. For George Stoia, I'm Eddie Radosevich. We'll talk to you Saturday.